and welcome to another evening of frank conversation coming to you from our Abuja studios. That's hard copy coming to you from our Abuja studios. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. What a week this has been. First, it started with a protest by the dailies on Monday who had large advertorials denouncing proposed amendments to the Nigeria Press Council Bill and Nigeria Broadcasting Codes. The alleged attempt to gag the media and black out information from ordinary citizens. Now, while discussions on that were ongoing, there were stories on security where two emirs of two different emirates were seized from their palaces. One of them, who since regained freedom, was taken alongside his family members who remain in the custody of the abductors. Now, while all of that was happening, Nigerians were waiting for the determination of the fate of two critical bills at the National Assembly. The Petroleum Industry Bill had been passed, but not without ripples, which caused calls for a review of sorts. But that which took the cake of attention is the amendment of the Electoral Act. After weeks of silence on the rumored adjustments made by the leadership of the National Assembly, specifically the Senate, Senate President Ahmed Lawan finally spoke up, confirming that there had been no alterations to the gazetted reports reached by the joint technical committees of the House and the Senate. Now, this laid to rest insinuations that the work of the committees had been tampered with and heightened expectations that perhaps a landmark decision with regards to the conduct of the polls could be reached. Sadly, hope came crumbling like a pack of cards. Was the committee of the whole set up by their colleagues in the Joint Technical Committee who deliberated on the reports submitted to the National Assembly? And what impact, if any, are the amendments as passed going to have on the conduct of our elections going forward? Mr. Clement Wankwo, who is the Executive Director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC, is our guest tonight on Hard Copy. Mr. Wankwo, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you, Mokbe.
Let me quickly ask you, as one who did a lot of work behind the scenes, giving advice, particularly on the Electoral Act, what was your reaction when you saw how deliberations on the bill went on both the floor of the House and that of the Senate?
I think my reactions were before the floor of both houses. I think that for a National Assembly that described in its 9th legislative agenda the PIB and Electoral Act reform as cornerstones, as headlight achievements or possible achievements for itself, I think it was exceedingly disappointing to see both chambers take PIB and the Electoral Act in the last days of their second year as a legislative assembly. I think that for a lot of us who thought that it was important for the 9th National Assembly to show its accomplishments, two of its most important bills that it signaled as reform bills for the 9th legislative agenda, two of them ended up, I would say, even in chaos.
I was going to ask you whether, that was already in my questions, but not so up on the list, if you saw a reason for that. There are people who would say, that perhaps they wanted to leave on a high, especially since they were going on recess, and so they had pushed these bills as much as possible towards the end. You saw when the PIB was passed on the floor of the House, how much of a pat they gave themselves on the back. And maybe the same was also expected for the Electoral Act. Maybe that's why it was pushed towards the end, just before they went on recess. Did you see a reason for it? Do you agree with that reason?
Well, I think that for a country that wants to rub shoulders with the rest of the world, in an age when the Galactica was going up to space, when you have the next businessman thinking of taking the next spacecraft to space, when the world is pushing the frontiers of entrepreneurship, creativity, and achievement to its uttermost limits, I think for a lot of Nigerians who had hoped that the National Assembly would pass an electoral act that is popular with citizens, this was really the opposite of where the world is headed. And I think that you don't leave such an important bill. If you've signaled these two bills as your most important flagship bills for the 9th Assembly, you are really going to have to be very meticulous with it to ensure that you give your citizens what they have asked for. And I don't think that anybody in Nigeria would say that this is the kind of bill that would take us to the next level. Certainly not. And I think that for a lot of Nigerians who appeared before the public hearings, who came with a lot of expectations, who said to the National Assembly, we really would like you to take us to the next step of constitutional electoral reform. I think that people have been very disappointed, not just because of even what was passed, but because you waited to the last minute. And as we speak, we don't know what has been passed, even in one of the chambers. So I think there's a lot of confusion. And really, it's worrying for a lot of people who came into this country in 2019, who observed the elections in 2019, who went to the nooks and crannies of this country, who after observing the elections issued a report to say, these are the improvements made in the elections, but these are the downsides of the elections. And given that we have these downsides, would like to see changes made. There were recommendations from observers from Nigeria, the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, several other observation groups from within Nigeria, international observers from different foreign missions, the European Union, several others were in this country in 2019. And I think that when they make recommendations, it is with the hope that you will improve your elections. That's not what we have seen.
In fairness to the members of the National Assembly, especially the Joint Technical Committee, there were rigorous debates on, contentious sections of the amendment. And I think that the most contentious, it would seem the most deciding one has been Section 52. They did say that they had very rigorous debate on it before they eventually reached an agreement on what should be in the report. In fact, there were fears that that perhaps that particular section had been altered because the leadership of the National Assembly had not laid that bill to be considered, despite the fact that work has since been done on it since the first quarter of this year. They had promised that they were going to deliver, that's the National Assembly deliver and be done with the Electoral Act amendment by the first quarter of this year. Sadly, this is when it is. I don't know when it is sad,
this is the third
but
quarter of the year.
This is when it is happening, and you have said, you've expressed some disappointment on that. But to their credit, they did put it in their report, despite the disagreements that they had on it. Do you think that seeing just how contentious that part was, that they ought to have been able to reach a consensus of sorts, which they felt to be more acceptable to their colleagues, knowing just how much of a contention they had in their own committee deliberations?
The Joint Committee, which had both members of the Senate and the House, and again, I would say that the Joint Committee, both the Senate and the House, did an excellent job. Since all of my years of engagement with National Assembly, I've never seen any collaborative effort as happened between the House and the Senate committees on electoral matters and INEC. I think that both the Honorable Aisha Duku, who chairs the House Committee, and Senator Gaya did an excellent job managing, even within the committees, the Joint Committee, the dissenting voices and all of that. They were able to come up with a position. And it was the report of that Joint Committee that was ultimately laid on Tuesday in both chambers. So there was no divergence in what was laid. What has happened, of course, is that during the deliberations, you now did see proposals for changes to the Joint Committee report. So let's not take away credit from what the Joint Committee did. They did an excellent job. That was presented. And
now, the question I'm asking is, looking at how much contention happened in their committees, do you think they already set up their members, the committee of the whole, for such a disagreement at the end of the day?
No, there were contending issues within the committee from what I understand. But I did see that both members, all of the members of the committee agreed on a compromise. And the Joint Committee included INEC as well, included representatives of the office of the Minister of Justice. What was reached and what was presented on the floor of both houses on Tuesday was the consensus, the compromise reached, which was that the issue of voting shall be as determined by INEC. Now, when we talk about INEC, INEC has gone, what are we doing today? INEC is asking people to register on portals they have set up. INEC has set up an electronic register, voters register. So everything INEC is doing is already gone electronic. In recent elections conducted by INEC, whether it's even the most recent in Borno State, in Niger State, as far back as Edo State governorship elections in 2020, a lot of results, the results were transmitted electronically. So it's not a question of INEC saying we are not able to execute this. And during the preparations towards Edo and towards the 2019 general elections, INEC had consultations with the stakeholders, including the National Communications Commission, whom INEC met with and asked NCC, are you able to deliver coverage? And the NCC said, yes, we're able to deliver coverage except for 8,000 polling units. 8,000 polling units out of 120,000 polling units is less than 7%. So NCC in 2018 had told Nigeria and Nigerians and INEC that it could provide coverage across the country up to a maximum of 92%.
But today the story is different.
Today the story is different.
In the Senate, interestingly, a division was asked for and it was granted. And we saw the voting pattern. I mean, thankfully, the Senate president did allow Nigerians see how their senators voted. And from what we noticed, senators largely, I mean, it was done along party lines, largely. Those for the APC or those who belong to the APC voted that INEC should be able to transmit. Yeah, let me quickly read this. INEC is to seek clearance from the NCC before transmission of results electronically and with the approval of the National Assembly. They have been huge contentions of this one. And senators on the PDP went to the amendment saying that INEC should transmit election results when and where practicable. So it would seem that for them, those were the underlying issues. According to them, that in many places there was no network. You have answered that. In the House, the approach was different. The House sought expert opinion. They said they were going to call INEC and also call NCC. But much later today, we understand that only the NCC was asked to come. They didn't want INEC to sound partisan. But from the voting pattern that you saw in the Senate, what were your thoughts?
Well, clearly it was divisions along, I would say, ethnic and party lines. And that's, for me, is one of the worst examples of practice of democracy. If democracy is to endure in a country, then self-interest, ethnic interest, religious interest shouldn't supersede national interest. And that for me, I think is worrying for the country. I think that, and we've seen this before. We've seen a situation where members of the National Assembly have, for self-serving purposes, taken a position. It's 18 months to the next election. So much can change that would make even those who voted against electronic transmission of results today to regret their action. And I can tell you that they will regret their actions. Because in the moment, 18 months to an election, you're already thinking what your interests are when you have no control over all of the indices of the elections. So I believe that what has happened both in the Senate, in the National Assembly, in the House, has not necessarily been decided in the national interest, especially in a world where the system is moving away from the instincts we have, the primordial instincts that we have in this country today.
Well, I don't have that exact list, but I have seen the list of senators, and it was seen that it was largely more along party lines because those from the Southwest, those from the South-South, some of them did, as long as they were with the APC, voted that, INEC should seek permission. But we'll dwell a bit more on that and ask what the impact of what was passed will be on our polls going forward. That will be after this break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. Mr. Clement Wankwo of PLAC is our guest tonight, and we're looking at the dust of issues raised by the passage of the electoral amendment. Now, let me quickly ask you about what you make about what happened on the floor of the House today. The House did push theirs from Thursday to Friday because of how heated things got on the floor. Eventually, we saw PDP lawmakers walk out of the chambers. What message do you think that they were trying to pass, and what effect do you think that would have on the electoral bill, considering the fact that it's passed anyway, and it would seem that majority has had their way?
Well, usually something you don't boycott is legislative proceedings. You also don't boycott elections. They would go ahead anyway. I'm not quite sure I want to comment on the action of both what happened in the House and on the floor of the House today, or even with the action of one of the political parties. But I think that always, and this is speaking generically now, always it's important that the fundamental document, the ground norm of conduct of elections, which would be the electoral law, which takes root from the Constitution, would need to be a law that is acceptable to all. And not talking political parties, talking about Nigerians, I think a lot of people would love to see an election that has very little human factor, which means use of technology. And we have seen, whether it is Z-Pad or whatever it is else that INEC has introduced, we have seen that you can transmit results of elections. And when smart card readers are used for elections, because I noticed that there was even the question that smart card readers and other technological devices was rejected. Now, smart card readers is an instrument which is for this time. In fact, it's even been phased out by INEC. It's like saying you would put the manual 090 phone number use, which was used in the 80s in an act, and then you come into the 21st century and you find that that technology has been wiped out. So why would you, in fact, talk about smart card readers in a law that is supposed to endure for long? That's why the portion about other technological devices put in. And when you look at Section 158 of the Nigerian Constitution, it's quite clear. The machinery, the mechanism, the thinking, the creativity about organizing an election rests with INEC. And a progressive electoral commission is able to continuously invent new ways of delivering on credible elections.
Now, are we to then discard the advice of the NCC? Because we understand that they were on the floor of the House today and they said, oh, no, not the entire country has 3G network, and only 3G network will be suitable to transmit election results electronically, and only 50% of the country has 3G network. What are we to do about that if that is coming from the NCC?
We do know that in 2018, the NCC had said that only 8% of the country cannot be accessed by the devices being used by INEC. I think that the NCC needs to match this new statistics with what it said in 2018.
Is it possible that INEC has upgraded its equipment so that it only requires 3G network, or I don't know? What are your thoughts? Do you think INEC should have been invited to give perhaps better clarity, an addendum of some sort to what the NCC was saying?
I don't know who stopped INEC from coming. I think it's something that perhaps and you don't expect INEC will get into the political quagmire going on, but certainly someone stopped INEC from going to come into the National Assembly today. I believe that if INEC had come, it would have been able to state the true position of things, because INEC in its own system has been able, even as recent as a few months ago with by-elections conducted in Borno, in Niger, shown that it is able to transmit election results from even some of the most difficult telecommunication terrains in the country. And I would rely more on what INEC says than an executive body such as NCC.
It would seem that Section 52 is the singular, most defining clause in the entire consideration of the Electoral Amendment Act. Is that correct?
Yes, part of the reforms that when you look at what has happened you might perhaps even reach the conclusion, why all the bother? Why did we amend the Electoral Act? What was the purpose? What is significant, if you don't include that section 52 as the Joint Committee found out and presented, if it's not approved, then why did we spend so much time? Why did you invite people from all over the country to public hearings? What was the purpose of the public hearing? Because it seemed that the public hearing, the consensus from the public hearing was, let's take our elections to the next level. Let's include technology. Let's reduce the human element. And if you had all of that public hearing, if you had all of the CSOs engaged and involved, if you had all of the development partners, if you had all of the international and Nigerian observers reach those submissions and presented it to your committee, spend so much money, why did you get them involved if you are not going to listen to them? And that's simply what has happened with this bill that has been passed. And I think the President Buhari, had made a comment a couple of months ago that he will bequeath a legacy to Nigeria, which would be a credible election in 2023. I think it's important for the President at this time to look at what the National Assembly has done, and if it comes that the bill reaches him without these improvements, the President should decline assent, because a bill such as has been passed by the National Assembly today and yesterday in the Senate, today in the House, as has been passed, if it is what is sent to him, then I think the President should decline assent. I think it's better for this country that we revert to the existing Electoral Act with all of its slight amendments, the 2010 Electoral Act, than to foist on this country and a bill as has been passed this week by the National Assembly. It's not an improvement on what exists. It's not an improvement on the electoral system. It perhaps even takes us back.
Not even with the improvement on campaign financing, not even with the improvement on the decisions that INEC will now be able to reject results announced under duress and things of the sort. Those ones will not count?
That, again, we're not sure what was passed regarding election results announced under duress. And the provision regarding election campaign finance, which was indicated, there has been questions about enforcement. Now, the one that we know is already being implemented is related to electronic devices and use of electronics for elections. INEC is already doing voter registration online. INEC is already receiving results online transmitted. So if you don't give it the supporting law to do that, then the question is even what is going to happen with our voters register INEC is compiling.
But if this is about democracy, where it's about numbers, majority carrying the day, and this is what majorities say their constituents want, this is how they have decided to vote, isn't it just about democracy at the end of the day? Shouldn't we just accept it, that this is what has been given to us and bequeathed to us by the National Assembly?
The numbers are there in terms of members of the National Assembly, but the numbers are also there in terms of what happened during the public hearings. And virtually everyone who came to these public hearings, which the National Assembly organized, had a common position about how to improve our elections. Did the members of the National Assembly vote within their constituencies or take the numbers within their constituencies to determine that this is what they've been told to come and vote for? Or did they vote based on their calculations of what protects them best as individuals ahead of 2023 elections? That's the question.
There are big questions. I'm sure that there'll be ones to be considering even while they're on recess. We have to thank you very much for coming on Hard Copy tonight, Mr. Clement Nwankwo.
Thank you, Mokbe.
Well, that's our program tonight, but your feedback will be appreciated. Give us your thoughts. Do you think Nigeria is not yet ripe for electronic transmission of results, as some people say, or do you think otherwise? Please make use of the handles on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Good night.